Disney infamously had a huge twist villain problem in the mid-2010s, where it's named that every villain who was thought to be a good guy but turned out to be evil was done worse than the last, though thankfully they seemed to eventually get the hint, and by the time they finally did another one it was done much better, as I went over in another video which you can find a link in the description too. But if I had to pick, out of all of Disney's twist villains from the 2010s, which one was done the worst, it would easily have to be Professor Callahan from Big Hero 6. Now I know that's not a universally held belief, but in my non-professional, self-taught, and hopefully humble opinion, Callahan is frankly the embodiment of everything Disney has been getting wrong with their villains in the new millennium all rolled into one, with him being done so bad that I would go as far as to say that he drags down the entire film just by being in it. And today, I'd like to go over Professor Callahan's character and demonstrate why he's such a poorly done villain by pretty much any standard. And obviously there will be even more spoilers for Big Hero 6 ahead, so in case you don't want anything else ruined, you might want to click off the video now. This will be the only spoiler warning I'll be giving out. Okay, so one of the biggest reasons that many came to hate the Disney twist villain trend was because the reveal that any given character was evil tended to come right out of nowhere without any foreshadowing. However, one of the biggest criticisms lobbied against Callahan is instead that the twist was too predictable. And indeed, if one is paying attention, it isn't too hard to deduct that he may very well be the bad guy. And there's also the fact that the narrative seems to believe that it's being really clever when presenting the twist, as if it thinks it did a very good job of hiding it when it honestly hadn't, which only makes it more underwhelming. But what makes Callahan a special brand of bad, especially by Disney standards, is that he also suffers heavily from the other Disney villain trend of the 2010s and 2020s by being presented as sympathetic by the narrative when there is nothing about this character to warrant anything but disgust. Now, some have actually debated with me in other videos if Professor Callahan is even supposed to be a sympathetic character, which should honestly speak volumes to how badly Disney handled his character. Because once again, I'm no writing expert, but just based off what I do know, it's pretty obvious that from a thematic standpoint, Callahan has to be at least somewhat sympathetic because it makes him the perfect contrast to Hero in that they're both grieving from the death of a loved one. But while Hero is ultimately able to let go of his need for revenge, Callahan is not. And then when it's revealed that she's alive on top of that, he's left full of remorse because now he's realized that his revenge was ultimately for nothing and what it actually cost. But the problem is that, beyond his motivation of wanting to avenge the apparent death of his daughter, nothing he does in the narrative makes him remotely sympathetic. Because among the obvious stuff, he tries to kill a group of teenagers, most of whom he personally knows, to end their interference, won't own up to the fact that he caused the death of his prize student and tells his brother to his face that it was his own fault, and his final plan could have easily killed hundreds of innocent people that had nothing to do with his daughter's accident. I'm sorry, but even though losing a child is painful and something no one should ever have to go through, he just takes things way too far for it to justify his behavior. And not to mention, as some have pointed out, his daughter was part of a crash course. The whole point is to see if the experiment was dangerous. If he didn't want his daughter in danger, then he shouldn't have encouraged that line of work. But I'll get back to that point a little later. Now, all that being said, some have argued that his infamous line, "That was his mistake," should be given a pass because it's deliberately intended by the narrative to hurt Hero and drive him over the edge. Oh, it was supposed to hurt Hero, so that automatically makes it okay that he said that. And that's also why it's okay that Amon Goth shoots innocent people in cold blood, or that Nurse Ratched drives an innocent boy to kill herself, or Dolores Umbridge's countless petty acts. You see, all these things are suddenly completely justified and excusable because it's supposed to hurt the good guys. Yeah, as you can probably guess, just because an action is meant to inspire a specific reaction in story doesn't mean that the action itself automatically gets a free pass. Because it's true, Callahan's callous response is what pushes Hiro to attempted murder, but that still doesn't change the fact that he caused Tadashi's death, and not only doesn't feel any remorse for it, but he doesn't even have the decency to admit it on top of that. It does not reflect good on his character. Seriously, how did Disney expect the audience to retain any sympathy for him when he doesn't exhibit an ounce of regret for his behavior? But there's also the things that aren't talked about nearly as much, with just one being that despite how smart he's said to be, he could make Hans Doofenshmirtz look like Professor Moriarty. Because even apart from what I mentioned before about his daughter actively signing up for danger and yet still going into a murderous rage when something happens, there's also that his plan ultimately makes no sense. Because as I noted before, he could have easily gotten countless people killed in his revenge against one man, and the fact that he doesn't care about that in the least only makes him look even more like a piece of trash. As well as that, as others have pointed out, a much smarter plan would have been to simply rebuild the portal and see if he could retrieve Abigail. Now, to be completely fair here, one can argue that he was so blinded by rage and grief that he didn't think of that. And that is a reasonable point, but that still doesn't change the fact that his revenge was aimed squarely at one man, yet his plan could have easily led to the death of an entire city, and he doesn't seem to care at all. Seriously, there had to be better, much smarter, and more effective ways of getting revenge on him. So the fact that that was the best he could come up with makes him look both way stupider and way more evil than the narrative clearly wants him to be. And speaking of that, there's also the major problem that he never learns anything. As I even spoke about at length in my video on Disney villains, which you can also find a link in the description to, the fact that he drives a kid to attempt to kill him and nearly succeeds on top of that, and that doesn't even slow him down, really says something. Because people way more evil than the narrative tries to claim Callahan is would probably stop and ponder their actions after nearly driving a kid to cold-blooded murder. But Callahan seems both too consumed by revenge and refuses to take responsibility for anything, as his later interaction with Hiro shows that their previous meeting had no impact on him. Not even that he should maybe be afraid of what this kid might very well try to do to him next. But perhaps the worst, though most overlooked aspect about him is that he actually has the gall to demand Hiro give him back the mask that controls the microbes. Because I said it in one of my first videos on Pixar villains, which you can also find a link in the description to, and I'll say it again here. But one has to keep in mind that Hiro invented those microbes himself and is therefore his property, which Callahan unapologetically stole from him. And when Hiro gets back what's rightfully his, he has the nerve to act annoyed and start shouting at him to give it back like Hiro's the one who's stealing from him, even though he has absolutely no right to that mask nor what it controls. Seriously, this man has absolutely no shame, and the fact that his daughter died in an accident that he blames somebody for and wants revenge doesn't automatically make his appalling behavior okay. But as I noted in one of the aforementioned videos, just because a villain has a sympathetic motivation for their actions doesn't immediately make them a sympathetic character. Because while grief can mess with people and make them do things they normally wouldn't with a clear head, that only extends so far. And the fact that Callahan engages in theft, murder by proxy, attempted murder, and above all won't own up to anything he does, even when repeatedly confronted on it, makes the narrative's attempts to excuse his behavior fall completely flat. Because not only is even attempted murder against innocent people something that shouldn't be justified, but his lack of remorse is only the clincher. Because if he was repeatedly shown to regret his behavior but feels he has no choice but to go forward with his plan, that would be one thing. It might not have been enough to save his character entirely, but it would have gone a long way in making the audience audience feel for him. But the fact that he never once displays a hint of regret and, as I already pointed out, only seems to regard Hiro as if he's annoying him whenever he talks to him, makes it seem less like his grief is clouding his rational thinking and more like he was always evil and now has no inhibitions and using his daughter's death as an excuse. Again, the fact that he lost his daughter alone does not excuse his behavior, and the fact that Disney believed that the audience would automatically sympathize with characters by giving them a tragic background is how we would later get such terrible villains as Norame. Because simply put, everybody has loved ones that have died. That's just the way of it. But no matter how upset you are, that doesn't justify doing horrible things to other people. And on that note, he doesn't even really serve as a dark reflection of Hiro like the writers will clearly want him to be, as I mentioned before. Because unlike Callahan, Hiro was a good person who never dreamed of hurting anybody in retaliation for Tadashi's death until his murderer essentially rubbed it in his face. Seriously, I know I've already said this, but even if Hiro shouldn't have done it, Callahan completely deserved what Hiro did, if only to serve as a major reality check for what he had actually done. And the fact that it doesn't only shows how badly written his character is. But to stay on topic, Callahan drove Hiro to attempted murder, and even then it was arguably justified. Callahan decided completely of his own that he was going to kill Crary, who, unlike Callahan, actually showed remorse for what he had done. Honestly, I do try to keep my composure in these videos, I really do. But I dedicated years of my life to writing books and making sure that they were as perfect as I could make them. So the fact that this movie was met with such acclaim, and Callahan in particular has defenders, downright offends me. On what planet is any of this good writing? Because let me just reiterate this one more time. Callahan wants revenge and decides to murder a man who showed guilt and regret for what happened to his daughter completely of his own initiative. And when teenagers stumble onto his plan, he tries to kill them to silence them. Meanwhile, the thought of murder never crosses Hiro's mind, and only resorts to it after this man has repeatedly tried to kill him and scapegoats Tadashi for his own death. So the fact that the narrative tries to paint them as reflections of each other holds no water, because even at Hiro's worst moment, when he orders Baymax to kill Callahan, he's still 10 times the man Callahan is, as he's not only going after the guilty party exclusively after he took things too far, but it's reasonable to argue that he was justified in doing so because Callahan had proven himself to be extremely dangerous to innocent people already and wasn't going to back down. Now again, I'm not saying that Hiro should have had Baymax kill Callahan. He shouldn't have. Just that it doesn't automatically make them reflections of each other, because the context behind their desire for revenge is completely different. In other words, when a Disney movie makes having a teenager wanting to kill the villain look justified, you know that's a problem. And again, the fact that the narrative tries to make excuses for Callahan but not Hiro is the biggest reason for that. Because simply put, you can't have it both ways. Either Callahan is a sympathetic villain that feels regret for his actions and has lines he won't cross, or he's evil in spite of his tragic backstory. You can't do both, because the results make him look like a huge jerk that the narrative is unjustly labeling as sympathetic. And the fact that it's only after his daughter is revealed to be alive does he show any remorse only makes it worse and does not do anything to make up for what he did earlier. Because it's clear that had she really been dead, he never would have repented. If he was truly a good person, he should have been made to show remorse before she came back. Really, Callahan may just be one of the worst villains Disney has ever made, period, and is only tied with Narami for the title of the worst sympathetic villain they ever attempted, because there is nothing sympathetic about Callahan's character by the time it's over. Honestly, Disney screwed up so badly with him on every front that he could legitimately be a go-to example for everything not to do when writing a villain, because there isn't a single element to this character that works as intended, except maybe James Cromwell's performance. And considering what he had to work with, even that isn't much. And when one takes into account just how perfectly Disney used to make their villains in the past, the fact that they were the ones responsible for one as terrible as Professor Callahan really shows just how far they've fallen in that department. Okay, I think I've more than made my point here. So now I'd like to hear from all of you. Do you believe that Professor Callahan from Big Hero 6 is easily the worst twist villain Disney ever attempted, and maybe one of the worst villains to come out of the company overall? Or do you believe that he was better written all around than I'm giving him credit for? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Because despite how passionate I got about this, and I do apologize for getting a little overly heated, you do not have to agree with anything I said here that you don't want to, and if you happen to think I was totally wrong about everything I said, that is completely fine. And thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.